Okay, everyone, it's been a while since I've worked on this project, but recently someone asked me to continue, so let's pick up where we left off. So right now, there really isn't any kind of scoring. The only tracking that we do right now is how many missiles remain. We haven't actually created any kind of scoring system for when you destroy the incoming projectiles. So that to make that happen, we need two things. We're going to need another text mesh object that, just like this one, is going to be uh, um, um, modified or controlled by the GM object. But the second thing that we're going to need is a new variable that stores your score. So let's do that. So in the GM script, we need to add public static, and it needs to be static so it's accessible throughout the entire application, int, so public static int, and we'll call this P1 current score. I advise avoiding words that are very common, such as score or player one. There's certain code references to those words, and you don't want to ever accidentally use a word that's protected. So might seem a little bit unwieldy, but like I said, you really want to avoid just using words like score or name or player just to be safe. So we save that. Actually, might as well go ahead and set that to 0. So that's going to store the score. This is going to store the text mesh object. So public transform, and this is going to be, let's call it, let's use a similar naming, P1 score obj. And just like this one, having the suffix obj to remind myself that this is an object variable for when I see it appear in lists. So let's go to the GM object. The static variable we don't see here. Static variables don't show up here. And there's our P1 score object. So now we just need to create the object. Well, we already have this text object. So why reinvent the wheel? Copy, paste, and we'll rename this. We'll call this P1 score. And I'm being careful not to use exactly the same word. So this is P1 score. This is P1 score obj. So let's make a couple changes to that object. First of all, it's not going to say 15. It's going to say score. Technically, I don't have to put this here because what's going to happen is I'm going to modify that. So just as I modify this text object, I'm going to modify this one. But this will help me line it up easier. So let's make this like a 32 font. So there we go, score. And depending on where you're putting the score, there's one thing you might need to change. So if you want this to stay aligned to the left and move out to the right, then the anchor is exactly as it should be. Watch what happens. So 0, 0, 0, score moves out to the right, life is good. But say you want it to be in the center and you want it to push out. You always want the whole thing to be centered. So that would be middle center. Watch what happens here. Now it pushes out in both directions. So it all depends. As far as alignment, this makes a difference. As far as other functionality, it doesn't make a difference. The code that I'm about to show you will work no matter where it's on the screen. But as far as alignment, I just wanted to take a minute to point that out. Okay, so we have our score variable. We have our score object to display the score. Now we need something that connects them together. So just like we did here, we're going to do the same thing with the P1 score object. So P1 score obj, and this was what I was talking about. When you see it pop up in a list, even though these are similar, I know that this is the right one. It's got obj at the end, so it reminds me that it's an object. Dot get component, because again, the text mesh is a component, so you're using a statement that says get component. which component? The text mesh component. Which attribute? The text attribute. And what's it going to be set to? Well, it's going to be a little bit different. So this one is going to be set to a string concatenated with a variable. Now, something that I notice, don't seem to have to do this anymore. I'm not sure if it was an update or what, but whereas I had to turn this number to a string to work right, don't seem to have to do that anymore for some reason. So I'm not sure if it's because this was originally made in 5.3, and I believe I'm using 5.4, but something to test, you might not need that anymore. And the reason why I'm saying that is because you're about to see that this is going to look a little bit different. So plus P1 current score. And again, I see that it doesn't end with OBJ, so I know it's not an object. So if I had to use this formatting, I'd have had to add toString. So let's see what happens. So right now, all I've done is I've set this variable to the text mesh object. It's not actually tracking score yet. There's nothing increasing that variable. So let's run it. Score. So just to test it, so P1 current score, we'll set it to 100. Save it. Actually, the variable P1 score OBJ has not been assigned. Oh, I'm so sorry. So we created the variable on the GM object. We did not actually say what the object was for that variable, so my apologies. So there we go. So like I said, don't seem to need that toString code anymore. Don't seem to need this anymore for some reason. I'll leave it there because I don't want to mess with something that I know is working, but looks like you don't need that anymore, maybe because of the version of Unity. So yeah, so sorry about that. So we created the P1 score object, and we set the variable to be displayed in it. We just didn't say what this object actually was. So there's the P1 score object, and then we just had to drag and drop, the P1 score object variable, and we had to drop the actual object onto it. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's almost it. Now we need to actually track that score. So let's set this, not track it, excuse me. We need to actually modify it. So we need, for the comet control, this is what's attached to the incoming projectiles, we already check for a trigger. If it's colliding with the explosion, then we want something to happen. Well, we already destroyed the object, so now, in addition to destroying the object, we're going to modify that score variable. So the score variable is declared in GM, so we have to choose GM, and then we need to put in that score. So it's current score. So it's gm.p1 current score plus equals 10. So in other words, what this says is take the current value and add this amount to it. Looks like I actually broke my own rule too. See how this is named GM, the script, and the object is named GM? It works. It could potentially be an issue. Not so much as if, say, a variable was also named GM. That would be confusing. But to be safe, probably shouldn't name the object GM and the script GM. It's probably fine, but again, you want to be careful that you don't create any confusion. And that's the nature of best practices. Sorry for beleaguering the issue. A best practice isn't necessarily a problem. It's avoiding a potential problem. Okay, so I think that should about do it if I did not forget anything. So let's shoot. And there we go. 10. Aim is terrible. 20. 30. 40. So there you go. So just like that, you now have a scoring system. You could do something like maybe you get a bonus for consecutive shots, which means to track consecutive shots, you would therefore have to track misses. And that is a little bit more complicated because we don't really have a mechanism to do that yet. So basically, when the missile explodes, if there isn't any collision, then it would reset the consecutive variable. So you'd create a new variable. If you hit 2 in a row, goes up to 2. Hit 3 in a row, goes up to 3. But if you miss, resets it back down to 0. So there's all kinds of things you can do with score like that. So I think that's about it for this video. If you have any questions, just let me know. I certainly can do a couple more. Like, I don't think I did anything with the UFO yet. I brought the object in and then I stopped. Really wasn't getting a lot of views, but someone asked me to continue, so more than happy to continue. So that should about do it for now.